Jung Tae-hyun had spent 55 nights sleeping on the sidewalks of Los Angeles, testing which woman would treat him like a person instead of an inconvenience. Imani Grant was the only one who did. A spare key, a couch, 90 days of a truth she never knew was a lie. At her kitchen table, he finally told her everything. His real name, the 4 companies, the marriage his father was arranging, the $11 million he'd refused to touch for 3 months, just to find out if anyone would help a man who had nothing. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She said she needed time. That same day, Tae-hyun told his father he wasn't marrying Yuri Song, and his mother asked, out loud, what a family like Imani's could possibly bring them. Since then, his mother came around quietly, in Imani's kitchen. A business war with the Song family resolved through a lesson Imani's father had taught her. Sang-hoon watched his son handle it with a steadiness he hadn't expected. For the first time in 29 years, he asked for a woman by name, inviting Imani to dinner this weekend. Welcome back. If this is your first time here, parts 1 through 4 are everything you need. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss what comes next. Now let's get into part 4. Imani stood in front of her closet Friday evening, with considerably more anxiety than the occasion technically warranted. 3 outfits already discarded on the bed behind her. You're overthinking this, Tae-hyun said from the doorway, watching her hold up a 4th option against herself in the mirror. I'm meeting the parents of the man I love, for the first time as an actual guest, instead of a scandal they're managing, Imani said. I think a little overthinking is earned. My mother already likes you. You met her in your own kitchen, remember? She came to you. That was different. That was her testing whether I was real, on her own terms, without an audience. Imani set the dress down, exhaling. This is a dinner. A formal one. In a house where I already know your father's spent 29 years deciding which women were worth his attention before they even got a seat at his table. Tae-hyun crossed the room and took her hands, the specific steadiness he'd learned somewhere between a sidewalk and a kitchen table settling into his voice. You don't have to earn a seat at that table. You already have one. Whatever happens tonight, that doesn't change. Easy for you to say. You're not the one walking in as the exhibit. You're right, he said. I'm not. But I promise you, whatever test he's planning, and I think we both know there's likely to be one, it's not going to be about your pedigree. My father's smarter than that, even at his most difficult. If he's testing anything tonight, it's whether you're steady enough to survive being married into this family long term, not whether you own the right dress. Imani studied him for a moment. You just said married. I did. Tae-hyun didn't flinch from it. I haven't asked. I'm not asking tonight, in the middle of a dinner designed to test you on my father's terms. You deserve better than a proposal squeezed into somebody else's evening. But I want you walking in there knowing exactly what I already know. This isn't a test you have to pass to keep me. I'm already yours, regardless of how tonight goes. Something in Imani's shoulders eased at that, the specific tension she'd been carrying since the invitation arrived finally finding somewhere to settle. Okay, she said. Then let's go find out what your father's actually testing. He drove them there himself, rather than calling a car, another small deliberate choice in a week full of them. Proof, he'd told her earlier, that this wasn't a formal summons, but a decision he wanted to arrive at beside her, instead of ahead of her. She spent most of the ride quiet, watching the city slide past the window, running through the same handful of questions she'd been circling for days. What if I say the wrong thing, she finally asked, somewhere past Wilshire. There isn't a wrong thing, Tae-hyun said. Not the way you're imagining it. My father isn't looking for the correct answer to a script he's already written. He's looking for whether you flinch when things get uncomfortable, or whether you stay yourself regardless of the room. You've never once flinched with me, not even when I was lying to you for 3 months. I don't think tonight's going to be any different. That's a generous read of my track record, Imani said. I cried in your kitchen for a solid 10 minutes the night you told me the truth. You cried because it mattered, Tae-hyun said. That's different from flinching. Flinching is pretending something doesn't matter to protect yourself. You've never once done that, not even when it would have been easier. She reached over and took his hand on the console, something steadying in the gesture that neither of them needed to name. Okay, she said again, quieter this time. I believe you. Or at least, I believe you enough to walk through that door without falling apart before the appetizer. That's all I'm asking, Tae-hyun said. And meant it. The Hancock Park house looked, on arrival, exactly as intimidating as Imani had built it up to be in her head for the better part of a week. The specific, quiet grandeur of old money that had never once needed to announce itself loudly. Yoon Mi-suk met them at the door personally, a departure from formality that Tae-hyun clocked immediately as its own kind of message. Imani, she said, using the name without hesitation, the way she hadn't quite managed to, in Imani's own kitchen weeks earlier. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me, Imani said, matching the formality without losing the warmth underneath it. Sang-hoon met them at the table with a nod, more restrained than his wife's welcome, but not unkind, the specific measured courtesy of a man who reserved warmth for occasions that had earned it, rather than distributing it freely. Please, sit, he said. I understand you've had a long week. My son mentioned the song situation kept you both occupied. It did, Imani said, taking the seat Mi-suk indicated. Though I think Tae-hyun did the actual work. I mostly just talked through what my father used to do on his mail route. A modest opening, Sang-hoon said, something unreadable in his tone. I'll reserve judgment on how modest it actually is. Dinner began with the specific, careful choreography of a household accustomed to entertaining people whose opinions mattered, though Sang-hoon himself said little through the first course, watching Imani with an attention that felt less hostile than simply thorough, the specific quality of a man cataloging data points before drawing conclusions. Mi-suk filled the early silence with practiced ease, asking about Imani's work at the insurance company, the specific texture of managing 3 directors who each believed their own priorities were the most urgent in the building. It's mostly about knowing which fires are real and which ones just feel real to the person standing in them, Imani said. You learn to tell the difference fast, or you burn out inside a year. That's a useful skill in any business, Mi-suk said, glancing almost imperceptibly toward her husband. It is, Sang-hoon agreed, setting down his water glass. I've built 4 companies on precisely that distinction, and I've watched considerably more experienced executives fail to make it correctly. He studied Imani for a moment longer than the comment strictly required. My son tells me your father was a mail carrier. 31 years, Imani said. Same route in Inglewood, the whole time. And you credit him with the strategy that resolved my company's difficulties with the Song family. I credit him with a way of seeing people, Imani said. The strategy was Tae-hyun's. He's the one who actually walked into that room and used it. A modest correction, Sang-hoon said. Most people in your position would have taken the credit outright. He set down his utensils, something more direct entering his posture. I'd like to ask you something, and I'd like an honest answer, not the answer you think I want to hear. That's the only kind I know how to give, Imani said. My son gave up everything for 90 days to test whether anyone would choose him without an incentive attached, Sang-hoon said. He found you, but I have built 4 companies on the specific, unsentimental understanding that circumstances change, fortunes rise, fortunes fall. If Tae-hyun lost everything again, not as an experiment this time, but permanently, through some genuine catastrophe neither of us could control, would you stay? The table went quiet. Mi-suk's eyes flicked toward her son, something careful in her expression. Imani didn't answer immediately, and when she did, she didn't reach for the easy version of the answer. I don't know, she said. I think anyone who promises you certainty about a hypothetical that large is lying to you. Or to themselves. What I can tell you is this. I already loved him for 90 days when I believed he had nothing at all. I fixed a hinge with him. I split a rotisserie chicken into 4 meals with him. I watched him put exact change back in an emergency jar because he wanted it to mean something. If he lost everything tomorrow, the man I'd be staying for is the same man I already stayed for once, before I knew there was anything else to lose. She just answered the one question that actually mattered, without flinching. Like and subscribe to help us grow so we can create more content like this, if you're already replaying that answer in your head. The dinner's not over yet. Stay close. Sang-hoon was quiet for a long moment after Imani's answer, something working behind his composed expression that Tae-hyun recognized, with some surprise, as genuine consideration rather than the calculated pause his father typically deployed before delivering a verdict. "That is not the answer I expected," Sang-hoon said finally. "What answer did you expect?" Imani asked. "Certainty," Sang-hoon said. "A promise dressed up as conviction. Most people, testing for approval, offer certainty because they believe it's what I want to hear. You offered me honesty instead, which is considerably rarer and considerably more difficult to manufacture on demand." "I don't think certainty about a hypothetical catastrophe is honest," Imani said. "I think it's just a nicer sounding lie. I'd rather you trust the answer I can actually stand behind." Mi-suk, who had been quiet through most of the exchange, finally spoke. "I told you," she said to her husband, something almost like satisfaction in her voice. "I told you, weeks ago, standing in her kitchen, that this was not a woman performing for an audience. You didn't believe me until you heard it yourself." "I believed you," Sang-hoon said. "I simply needed to hear it under different conditions than a kitchen she controlled entirely. A dinner in this house is not a neutral setting. I wanted to see whether the same honesty survived contact with a room designed to intimidate it out of her." "And?" Tae-hyun asked, unable to keep the edge of hope out of his voice. "And it survived," Sang-hoon said. He looked at Imani directly. "I have spent 29 years watching my son date women who understood, correctly, what our family could offer them, and shaped their answers accordingly. I did not expect at 61 to sit across from someone who simply told me the truth, regardless of what it cost her standing at this table." "It didn't cost me anything," Imani said. "I meant every word of it." "That," Sang-hoon said, "is precisely what makes it valuable. Things that cost the speaker nothing to say are rarely worth much. Things that cost nothing because they were never performed in the first place, those are worth considerably more." He turned to his son. "I owe you an apology I am not accustomed to giving," he said. "I spent months believing your disappearance was reckless sentiment, unbecoming of a man in your position. I understand now that it was the most disciplined decision you've ever made. You didn't gamble on love, you tested for it, the way I taught you to test everything else that mattered, rigorously, without illusion, willing to accept an answer you didn't want if that was what the evidence produced." Tae-hyun was quiet for a moment, something in his chest loosening at words he hadn't realized he'd spent his whole life waiting to hear. "I didn't think you'd ever say something like that to me," he admitted. "Neither did I, until I said it," Sang-hoon said, something almost rueful entering his tone. "I built this family on the principle that admitting error was a weakness competitors could exploit. I am beginning to suspect I applied that principle to my own son far more often than I ever applied it to an actual competitor, and that the cost of that mistake has been considerably higher than any deal I've ever lost." "You don't owe me a grand accounting tonight," Tae-hyun said. "I'd rather take this one step at a time, the same way I'd ask you to take Imani one dinner at a time, instead of deciding everything about either of us in a single evening." "That's fair," Sang-hoon said. "I find I'm not accustomed to fairness moving at this particular pace. I intend to practice." Mi-suk reached over and touched her husband's hand, something wordless passing between them that neither Tae-hyun nor Imani felt entitled to interrupt. The rest of the dinner unfolded with a warmth Imani hadn't allowed herself to expect, walking through the front door, Mi-suk asking genuine questions about her work, her parents, the particular texture of a childhood spent stretching a mail carrier's pension into something that had never once felt like lack. "Your mother," Mi-suk said. "At one point, the home health aide, does she still work?" "She does," Imani said. "She won't stop until her body makes her, and even then, I suspect she'll find a way to keep helping people from a chair, if it comes to that." "I would like to meet her someday," Mi-suk said, something unguarded in the offer that surprised even her. "Properly, not as a formality. I think I have things to learn from a woman who raised a daughter this steady." Sang-hoon, watching the exchange, allowed himself something Tae-hyun hadn't seen from his father in years, an expression that wasn't quite a smile, but carried its early, uncertain architecture. "There is a matter of business I'd like to raise," Sang-hoon said. once the dessert course arrived, his tone shifting back toward the formal register that governed most of his conversations. Not tonight, as a condition of anything, but soon. I am 61 years old, and I have spent considerable time recently reconsidering what I actually want this company to become, rather than simply what I built it to be. What are you thinking? Tae-hyun asked. I would like your input, Sang-hoon said. Both of yours. He glanced at Imani, something deliberate in the inclusion. I have run this business for 35 years on the principle that sentiment was a liability. I watched my own son prove, over the course of 90 days on a sidewalk, that sentiment tested rigorously is not a liability at all. It is simply a variable I never learned how to measure correctly. I would like to understand what a version of this company looks like that keeps the discipline I built it on, without repeating the specific loneliness that discipline cost me. That's not a small conversation, Tae-hyun said. No, Sang-hoon agreed, it isn't. I don't expect to resolve it over dessert. I only wanted you both to know it's a conversation I intend to have, seriously, in the coming weeks. Not as a test this time. As an actual question I don't yet know the answer to. Can I ask something? Imani said, since you've invited both our input. Please, Sang-hoon said. What made you decide to ask now? Not months ago, when he first came home and told you everything. Not even after Busan, when he'd already proven he could handle a crisis without you. Why tonight? Sang-hoon considered the question with the specific care of a man unaccustomed to being asked to explain his own timing. Because tonight, I watched you answer a question designed to make you flinch, and you didn't, he said. I have spent 35 years building a company on the theory that people reveal their actual character under pressure, not under comfort. I needed to see, with my own eyes, whether the two of you together were built to withstand pressure, or whether you'd simply been fortunate that none had arrived yet. Tonight answered that question more completely than any report Woo Jing could have compiled for me. So this was always a test, Imani said, even the part about the company. The test ended the moment you answered my question honestly, Sang-hoon said. Everything since then has been genuine. I don't test people twice in the same evening. That would be exhausting for everyone involved, myself included. Mi-suk laughed at that, an unguarded sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised the rest of the table. He means that as reassurance, she said to Imani. It's the closest thing to warmth he's capable of expressing directly at a dinner table. I'll take it, Imani said, smiling despite herself. Sang-hoon almost smiled back, the specific effort of a man relearning an expression he hadn't practiced in years. Good, he said. Because I suspect we'll be having considerably more dinners like this one, if tonight is any indication of what's ahead for this family. He just apologized to his own son at the dinner table, in front of everyone. Like and subscribe to help us grow so we can create more content, if you didn't see that coming either. There's still one more thread this family hasn't resolved. Stay close. Imani and Tae-hyun left the Hancock Park house a little past 11, the specific loose, unguarded quiet of two people who had walked into something dreaded and come out the other side considerably lighter than they'd gone in. I didn't expect an apology, Tae-hyun said, once they were in the car. Not like that. Not in front of everyone. I didn't expect any of it, Imani admitted. I walked in braced for an interrogation and left with your mother asking to meet mine. You handled the actual test better than I could have predicted, Tae-hyun said. I've watched my father dismantle grown executives with less pointed questions than the one he asked you tonight. I didn't handle it, Imani said. I just told him the truth. I think that's the only strategy I actually know how to use consistently, not because it's clever, but because it's the only thing I've ever trusted to hold up under pressure. It's not nothing, Tae-hyun said. Most people don't have the nerve to bet everything on honesty when the stakes are that visible. You did it without blinking. I had good practice, Imani said, glancing at him. 90 days of watching someone else do exactly the same thing, long after it would have been easier to lie. Tae-hyun reached for her hand at the stoplight, the specific unhurried certainty that had carried them through everything since a sandwich outside a dry cleaner's, settling into something steadier now, less like a question and more like a fact they were both simply living inside. My father wants to talk succession, he said. Real succession. Not just handing me the company someday, actually rethinking what it should become. How do you feel about that? Hopeful, Tae-hyun said, testing the word like he wasn't entirely used to applying it to anything involving his father. Genuinely hopeful, for the first time in longer than I can easily remember. I don't know what it turns into yet, but I'd like to find out, with you next to me for the conversation instead of waiting outside it. I'd like that too, Imani said. Whatever it turns into. They drove the rest of the way home, mostly in comfortable silence, the specific ease of two people who had spent an evening being tested and had come out the other side with more than they'd walked in carrying. Imani watched the city lights slide past the window, turning the evening over in her mind. Can I tell you something I didn't say back there? She asked, as they pulled into the driveway. Always, Tae-hyun said. I was terrified walking in, Imani said. Not of your father exactly, of the version of myself I thought I'd have to become to survive that room. Smaller, more careful, more willing to perform whatever version of myself would make him comfortable. I've done that before, with people who had power over whether I got to keep something I wanted. I didn't want to do it with your family. Did you have to? Tae-hyun asked, though something in his voice suggested he already suspected the answer. No, Imani said, something like relief still settling into her voice even now, hours later. That's the part I didn't expect. I just stayed exactly who I already was, the whole night, and it turned out that was enough. Maybe more than enough. She looked at him. I don't think I've ever had that happen before, walking into a room that intimidating and getting to leave it without having shrunk myself to fit inside it. You never have to shrink for anyone in my family, Tae-hyun said. Not my father, not my mother, not anyone else who walks through that door in the future. I'll make sure of that, every time, for as long as it takes for it to stop needing saying out loud. I believe you, Imani said. I think tonight proved you meant it, even before you said it. They sat in the car a moment longer, neither in any hurry to end the night, the specific unhurried quiet of two people who had survived something together and come out closer for it. Your mother really did seem to mean it, Imani said finally, about wanting to meet mine. She did, Tae-hyun said. I've never seen her offer that to anyone outside the family, not once in 29 years. I think I'd like that too, Imani said. My mother's going to have opinions about all of this, you know, about the house, the money, the whole scale of it. She won't be impressed by any of it, for what it's worth. She'll be watching to see if your family treats me the way people are supposed to treat each other, regardless of what anyone has. Then she and my father might actually get along better than either of us expects, Tae-hyun said. He respects exactly that kind of unimpressed clarity, even when it's aimed at him. Good, Imani said. Because I don't think either of them is going anywhere anytime soon. Choi Woo-jin arrived at the Figueroa office early Monday morning, well before Tae-hyun typically came in, a folder under his arm that he set on the desk with more deliberateness than the gesture usually carried. Your father called me over the weekend, Woo-jin said, once Tae-hyun arrived. Not about the dinner, about something considerably older, a piece of the company's original founding paperwork that surfaced during an unrelated audit. He wanted a second set of eyes before he brought it to you directly. What kind of paperwork? A minority stake in the original import license, Woo-jin said, dated to before your grandfather formally incorporated the business. Small percentage. Nobody's ever exercised it, because nobody's ever known it still existed as an active claim, technically valid, technically unresolved. He paused. The name on the original filing isn't a Jung. It's a name none of us recognize, and there's no record of the stake ever being bought out, transferred, or dissolved. Tae-hyun took the folder, scanning the first page with the specific unease of a man recognizing that whatever piece this weekend had produced was about to be tested by something entirely unrelated to the family he'd already spent months learning how to navigate. How old is this filing? He asked. Older than your father, Woo-jin said. Older than the incorporation records we've always treated as the true founding date. Whoever drafted the original license structured it as a partnership, briefly, before your grandfather bought out whatever stake existed and formalized everything under the Jung name alone. Except the buyout paperwork itself is missing. Not destroyed, missing, as though it was simply never filed, or was filed somewhere nobody's looked in decades. Does my father actually know what this means yet, or has he only just started to suspect it? He's still working through the implications, Woo Jin said. But if that stake is still technically active, decades later, whoever holds it, or whoever inherited the claim, has standing to challenge ownership of parts of this company neither of us has ever had to think about defending. Find out who, Tae-hyun said, quietly, before this becomes something we're managing in public, instead of understanding in private. Already started, Woo Jin said. I should have something by the end of the week. He paused at the door, something careful entering his tone. For what it's worth, the timing bothers me almost as much as the claim itself. This surfaces during a routine audit, 1 week after your father starts talking openly about succession for the first time in his life. I don't believe in coincidences that convenient. Neither should you. Noted, Tae-hyun said. Let's find out if you're right before we decide how worried to be. The family dinner went better than anyone expected, but a decades-old paperwork trail just surfaced a claim nobody saw coming. Comment if you think this old stake is nothing, or the start of a whole new fight. Part 5 is coming.